Thanks, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us this evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this Politics UK event. It's part of a series bringing senior political figures into conversation and with engaged audiences on the key issues shaping the country. I'm delighted that we're joined this evening by Michael Shanks MP for a discussion on energy bills, clean power and industrial growth. Michael is MP for Rutherglen. I'm afraid I had to look this up. You may have some sides. I don't know what but I can tell you just out of and yes, Michael is of course also Minister of Energy. Now, energy, of course, it sits at the centre of so many of the political discussions we're having at the moment, and we've been working on this for a long time. Can't remember a time when it was so frequently be on the front pages. But everything from cost of living to national security, climate commitments, infrastructure, jobs, public trust in government's ability to deliver. The format for this evening is going to start with a conversation between Michael and myself. Then we'll have a little bit of time for an audience Q&A. And then following that, we'll pick up some of the themes from the evening in a panel discussion. So with that, let's turn to some questions. Now, I'm going to take Chair's prerogative and ask what's probably many people's burning question at the moment. I'm going to ask about Andy Burnham. You pointed out there's a carefully placed magazine here with his mug. I'm not sure that's the number. The Times is just reporting that some supporters won't be appointing as Chancellor. That's true. That's true. What do you think that says about how he's going to approach the role of Prime Minister? General, particularly how he might approach the energy brief.
Well, good evening. It's good to be with you. All of this is just absolute speculation, and it has been for weeks. So, I understand why people want to speculate, and it's all very interesting. But all being equal, he'll become Prime Minister on Monday, and he'll announce his cabinet and his government then, and everything before then is just absolute speculation, and it will fill some column entries, but it doesn't really move the conversation forward. I think the wider question is really important, and there's been some insights into what he's likely to do in energy policy in what he's already said. But one of the key things I think that comes back to something Ed has been driving forward as Energy Secretary is that energy policy doesn't sit in isolation from wider economic and industrial policy. I mean, he said it in day one when I joined him in the energy department. We're an energy department, but we're also an industrial policy department. And this country for a very long time was just agnostic about industrial policy. We built these phenomenal bits of infrastructure that many communities can see off the coast of their towns and cities, but they were built somewhere else with the jobs that went with it somewhere else. And that's something we were determined to change. So when we came in, we obviously moved really quickly forward on the Clean Power mission, a really ambitious approach to our energy policy. But allied with that was a real ambition around supply chains and infrastructure built in Britain. And I think what you've seen from Andy is a commitment to saying we should see good growth in every postcode. That is, every pound of public spending that is spent on building energy infrastructure should result in investment in communities, jobs, apprenticeships, opportunities. That's how we get a real return for the British public. We were elected on a clear manifesto to become a clean energy superpower. We are a long way down the tracks of that in 2 years, but there's a lot more still to do. And we'll get on with finishing that job when Andy becomes Prime Minister. And everything else, we're just going to have to wait a few days.
Thank you. Before we move on, just another quick one on Andy. He's obviously very committed, and he said he's very committed to devolution. I just wonder how you think he's going to square that with what's also being done, out of the energy department to try and centralise decision making, speed up planning decisions. Some of that means going over the heads of local councils. So I just wonder how that's going to be balanced.
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, I know you said you don't know much about Scotland, but I'm going to talk about Scotland for a minute. It's really good to hear Andy talk about devolution, not just devolution in terms of powers going to different parts of the country, which is what we've had in this country for a long time, but what you do with that devolution. And in Scotland, I was in primary school when the Scottish Parliament was opened. I've grown up with devolution. It's been a part of my entire adult life. But a lot of communities in Scotland feel as distant from Holyrood as they do from Westminster, and that's got to change, and that's because the SNP's had a centralising agenda for 2 decades now. What Andy's talking about is how do we use those powers with a purpose, but also the unfinished bit in the UK has been devolution in England, which has never been taken seriously by a succession of governments. Elected mayors were a huge step forward, but there's a lot more to do. And I think what sits under that is we set some national outcomes for what we want to achieve, but then you accept some communities will take a different approach to how that's delivered. And in energy, one of the things we've really sought to do is go big on communities being in the driving seat of much more of energy policy, communities owning energy infrastructure. Andy and I are both members of the Cooperative Party as well as the Labour Party. The question of ownership really matters to us. And so the way to get energy policy into local communities is not just to have things done to them, but them actually owning and shaping these projects themselves. And then some of the best visits I've done in this job have been to communities with 2 or 3 wind turbines who are generating hundreds of thousands of pounds of profits that they're keeping in their community to invest in the long-term future of their community. That's, I think, how we get this right. But on your question about planning, which is a really good specific question, we've also got to build things in Britain again. And that has been the big reforms of the last 2 years, is not to sort of say we're going to say yes to every single planning application, but that it shouldn't take 10 years to get a decision out of a planning system. That's held back growth in this country for too long. But it's also meant, you look at some of the great examples of big infrastructure projects where the cost has gone up and up and up because we've got millions of pages of planning rather than actually just building the stuff. We've got to fix that, and that's what we've sought to do in 2 years, but there's even more of that to do.
Great. You mentioned the Clean Power Plan already. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of voices out there, you know, of course, prominently including parts of the Labour family, if I can put it that way, people like Tony Blair, arguing that the Clean Power Plan is kind of getting in the way of cutting bills, making electricity cheap so that we can electrify the economy. Do you think, to put it provocatively, that we're sacrificing, you know, cheap bills on the altar of some kind of ideological net zero drive?
No, I don't at all, and I think people who make that argument are missing the point of what the last few months have demonstrated above anything else. You know, we took £150 off the bills of costs off bills in April, and bills went up again entirely because of the situation in the Middle East. We are exposed to fossil fuels, and it's not just one example. I mean, we came in with the Clean Power Mission because when Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw a spike in fossil fuel prices that drove up everyone's bills. We spent tens of billions of pounds as a country subsidising energy bills because of our exposure to fossil fuels. Less than 5 years later, here we are with another fossil fuel crisis, not of our own making, and bills have gone up again. Every day we remain exposed to fossil fuels is a day where we're at risk. And the problem I've got with the other argument is it suggests we're in this world where it's possible to say we should spend money investing or not. We don't exist in that world. For us to meet future energy demand in Britain and for us to invest in a system that in many parts is creaking right now under the pressure of years of not being invested in, you either build new gas or you build new clean power. Combination of renewables, nuclear storage, everything else that goes with it. That's the choice we've got. And faced with those two choices, I find it unbelievable that there could still be people who right now look at what's happening to fossil fuel markets that we can never control and say, let's just build more gas. Let's keep us exposed to this casino, because 1 year bills might come down, but at some point you can be absolutely certain bills will skyrocket. Half of the recessions we faced as a country since the 1970s have been caused by fossil fuel shocks. So the answer is to get off that as quickly as possible. And then it's to electrify the wider economy as well. The answer isn't just to decarbonise the power system, it's then how do we get people in domestic settings into solar panels on roofs, batteries, heat pumps, all of these kind of things that help individually take some control to get them off gas as well. That's the collective mission we've set ourselves. And at the same time, we're taking the tough decisions to bring down bills as well. We had a commitment when we were elected to bring down bills. We will deliver on that. It's not going to happen overnight, but it doesn't mean we're on the wrong path.
Great. So you mentioned bills. That's predominantly household bills that we're talking about there. Obviously, households only use about a third of national electricity demand. The other 2/3 is businesses, industry. There's a big report out today from the CBI and Energy UK looking at how they think more could be done to cut bills for industry facing some of the highest energy costs, electricity costs in the G7. The main thing they're talking about is taking levies off bills across the board, not just for households. What do you make of their report? Is that something that the government could be looking at?
I saw an embargoed copy of this report, I think about 10 o'clock last night, so I have not read it all, I should say, but there's some good ideas in it. And look, we're not against the idea that if we can move some levies into general taxation, we should look at it. We're not, absolutely against it, but there's a cost either way, and we do need to look at the trade-offs of if you take something off bills, it's still being paid for in general taxation. And we did that with £150, so taking the renewable obligation off bills and onto general taxation, took £150 of cost off bills. So we're prepared to do that. There's definitely more to do, but I think we can't separate out the fact that the affordability crisis is our number one challenge as a government to tackle. We'll do everything we can to bring down bills in the short term, but we also have to do the bit that gets us off the exposure in the long term. And this is the sort of problem of governments for such a long time in Britain. It's been sticking plaster solutions that cost tens of billions of pounds now and just push the problem further down the road. Things like the grid is a really good example. If we had fixed the grid 20 years ago when we were building all these fantastic renewables projects, and in the past 14 years of a government who, I think I'm the last person standing who supports the Conservative government's building of renewables, because they don't anymore. They did a great job of building renewables. Now they dismiss it all as absolute nonsense. But they didn't connect it to the grids. And if they had done, we wouldn't be paying money to constrain those wind projects right now, and that cheaper power would be flowing into homes and businesses. So we have to fix the fundamentals and provide that short-term support for businesses and households. You've got to do both. I think just doing one kicks the can down the road, as we've had as a country for a long time, and we end up back here again 10 years, 15 years from now with the same problems.
Thank you for that. You mentioned grid and how important that is. Very recently, we've had some quite lurid headlines about accusations of cover-ups, near misses for blackouts in the National Energy System Operator Control Room. I know that's something you've addressed in Parliament. I think both you and Ed Miliband have accused Claire Coutinho, who's raised these concerns of scaremongering. But there is now an independent investigation going on into these accusations. I just wondered if there's anything that you could say this evening to reassure us all about the stability of the electricity system and what you expect to see out of that process.
Yeah, look, I think there's two parts to this. If there are concerns that have been raised, and Claire Coutinho says whistleblowers have come to her, we obviously will take that incredibly seriously, and that's why the National Energy System Operator has launched an independent inquiry into that. That's important. Of course, we should look at any whistleblowers who come forward. But that's quite separate from then raising the rhetoric to talk about blackouts when we did not have any disruption to customer supplies on the 23rd of June, which is the day that Claire Coutinho is talking about. Now, we absolutely should investigate if anything did happen that shouldn't have happened. That's absolutely right and proper, and it's right that NESO and Ofgem are looking at that, and government clearly has an interest. But nor should we simply raise this rhetoric, and it's happened over a number of months, but it's becoming increasingly loud, of sharing unfounded claims about impending blackouts when there is no evidence that was the case whatsoever. Yes, because of unprecedented heat and other weather conditions, not just in Britain but across Europe, the control centre made a lot more decisions to balance the grid than they normally would have, but they balanced the grid and lights did not go out. And it is important to remember that amid everything else. And, what I would take from a moment like that, the lesson I would take is weather is becoming more of an issue. It's becoming more extreme and it's becoming much more common. What is the cause of that? Well, the cause is the climate is changing. Should we do anything to tackle that? Yes, of course we should. But what do the people who say we're in an extreme situation because of the weather say? Actually build more gas. Let's not tackle the climate crisis. That's the thing I find really hard to believe in all this. You learn the right lessons from these moments, or you don't. And they've chosen to, and I think it's really disappointing actually, because we'll maybe say more about this. The consensus in tackling the climate has been an absolutely key part of not just this country moving forward, but actually of leading a wider coalition of people around the world to take climate action. That consensus is fractured. I hope it's not completely broken, because I think there are still some sensible people who I think are now not allowed to stand as Tory candidates, incidentally, but there are some sensible people like Theresa May, like Alok Sharma, people who still understand the science of climate, who are holding on. We need to hold that consensus together because it matters. And the example more than any that I point to was in October of the year I became Energy Minister 2024, I was at the closure of Ratcliffe-on-Soar coal power station. Normally ministers don't go to the closures of things, but it was actually a really important event. It was a genuinely historic moment because we switched off the last ever coal generation in Britain after 170 years of using coal to generate power. And there was a lot of foreign press there who were interested in how we'd managed to do it. And the question they all asked me was, how did you do this when you had governments of the left and right over 30 years? And the answer was, we had a clear-eyed consensus that tackling the climate went above party politics. And we phased out coal. 14 years of Conservative government helped phase out coal as well. That mattered. We've got to somehow get back to that, because the climate crisis is not some sort of future threat that we can worry about tomorrow. It's a very present reality. And the real danger is we're handing over a planet to our children that we haven't just done not enough to fix, we're actually actively made worse. And that can't afford to wait any longer.
Great. Now, obviously, you're a Scottish MP. I feel it would be remiss not to ask you about the North Sea.
Yeah. I thought you were going to ask me about the World Cup there. It's like it went downhill when we... It
would have been a bit cruel. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're closer than most MPs to that debate. We saw it playing a really big role in the by-election in Aberdeen. For the people working in the North Sea, this is obviously a very clear and present and visceral kind of situation. There's a lot of talk about a just transition as we move away from fossil fuels over the longer term. But for people who may be losing their jobs right now, that may be sort of scant comfort. They may be worried about all of the discussions around no new licenses, the windfall tax. Decisions being, taking a while on, let's say, on Jackdaw and Rosebank. What do you think you're doing as a government to reassure those people that there's a future for them in that industry, in that part of the country?
Yeah, it's a really important question. It's a really important way of framing it, because nothing comes into clearer focus about the transition than if you spend some time in Aberdeen, and as I have spent a lot of time as a minister, but I've also got friends and family who work offshore, so this is very real. And the first thing I suppose I'd say is, for 60 years, oil and gas has been a part of our energy mix, and it has also been a huge employer in Aberdeen, but actually the northeast of England and right across the country as well. And it will continue to be for a long time to come. We're not turning off the taps, and that has never been this government's policy. But nor do we think, having been a net importer for 30 years, that the North Sea somehow will answer all of our energy needs into the future. The North Sea has been in decline since 2003, and it is only going to be in decline whatever government policy is. Now, that doesn't mean that we take a disinterested view on how we steward the future of the basin. It does matter, and domestic production does matter. It creates jobs and it brings in revenue to the exchequer, so domestic production does matter. But our long-term future can't lie in oil and gas in the North Sea. And so it's incumbent on us to support that industry now, but equally to say we need to really increase the investment in what comes next. And that is in offshore wind, it's in carbon capture, it's in hydrogen, it's in decommissioning a lot of the oil and gas assets, actually, which is a huge liability with government, but it's also a huge jobs opportunity for a long time to come. And most of the jobs in oil and gas sit in the supply chain. They don't actually sit in direct workers on platforms. That supply chain is vital for what we want to do next as well. So there's an opportunity, but it's also imperative we get it right, or that supply chain could go somewhere else and we won't be able to build the things we need in the future. So we're doing a number of things. I mean, firstly, we've set out the North Sea Future Plan. What we were repeatedly asked for was a plan for the future of the basin. We should have been doing that when we first saw a decline in oil and gas, but we didn't as a country. That now marshals oil and gas, but also renewables and everything else together to try and work together on what the future looks like. But it also clarifies some of what we want to do around our pragmatic plan for the future of the basin. So things like tiebacks are really important to that. The viability of existing fields was the second bit of our manifesto commitment, which is often ignored. We said we would not introduce new licenses to explore new fields, but we would maintain existing licenses for their lifetime. And we meant that. And tiebacks, which is sort of some new production tied back to an existing platform, is the most economically viable way. A license could take a decade or more to actually come to fruition. So we will do that. And on particular projects, I can't talk about Jackdaw and Rosebank because they're decisions for my department. But I would just remind people that they were tied up in the courts under the previous government, and we had to start the process from scratch. So when the opposition talk about decisions being delayed, they were delayed because previous government's judgment was quashed by a court, and we've had to start the process again, and we will make decisions on those projects. So the future of the North Sea, to get back to your point on a human level, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we have had economic transitions in this country, coal being a really good example, where we have not done right by the workers who have done really quite dangerous work, actually. We're just past the anniversary of Piper Alpha, which is the most devastating incident in offshore oil and gas in global history. We should remember it's dangerous work, and we should be grateful for that work. And that means also investing in helping those workers get a good, sustainable, well-paid job into the future as well. And that's what we're doing.
Great. I'm going to turn over to the audience. But just before I do that, if I could just ask one final question. Imagine we're having this conversation again just before the next election. What one kind of achievement would you like to be pointing back to say, this proves the government was successful in its energy policy?
I mean, without a doubt, it has to be around affordability. It has to be that we've protected households and businesses from price spikes. I mean, that's got to be the number one thing. Now, sitting under that is a whole series of other things about energy security in a volatile and quite scary world right now, and sustainability and everything else. But if we fundamentally haven't shifted the struggle that, and I think this goes beyond just the last few years, we tend to think of the cost of living crisis as starting with Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But really, you can trace this back to 2008, to the financial crash. People have been struggling with affordability ever since. And until we get to a point where a sort of letter drops in the letterbox and people aren't absolutely terrified that it's a bill they just can't afford, we won't have really tackled the affordability crisis. Now, that's critical for energy bills, but it goes right across the board as well. And that's what Andy Burnham has said is a number one priority for the government. If we don't tackle the cost of living crisis, we haven't fundamentally improved people's lives, but we also, and this is the really fundamental challenge for us all who believe in the politics of the centre-left, we also leave the space open for populists to come in with the easy answer that we know is not going to solve anything, but say, we'll make your bills cheaper by ripping up contracts. And we know that that is not an answer to anything, but it is an argument that will land if we don't do everything we can to tackle the cost of living.
Great, thank you, Michael. Questions from the audience? We've got a couple in the front row here.
Oh, great, thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Minister. My name's Alex Beach. I run the Trade Association for the Manufacturers of Paper, Tissue, Cardboard Products, one of the energy-intensive sectors, and we're a supporter of Electrify UK. So thanks for Electrify Industry. So thanks for that. I wanted to just set out where we are on this affordability and the pathway to decarbonisation. See how close we are to your thinking government policy. So we use a lot of gas and we use biomass to make paper. Our pathway, according to the CCC, is very much electrification. We've seen in other countries in Europe that our industry will invest heavily in electrification. So one of our members, Farm Paper, their HQ in Germany, building world's biggest steam boiler, electric boiler, because the stable framework in Germany gives them certainty. So we're looking for a stable view about industrial electricity costs over the long term. Lower.
Yeah. So I think you're asking like how
just to put it, I'll be quick, sorry. So a stable view about electricity. There used to be an energy transformation fund, was capital investment. That would be amazing to come back, and the grid connections. And we do see a long-term role for those too. So how far apart are we from your government, let alone how a future government with different view might look? Because I think we're quite close. But how do you see that?
That sounds like we are, which is a good answer, I hope. Look, I guess the point around certainty in bills is quite interesting. And yes, certainty in lower bills, but it's part of also this question of the more we move onto renewables that are on contracts for difference, the more we have certainty of that 20-year cheaper electricity price. AR7, we managed to get the price of renewables 40% cheaper than new build gas, but the CFD also fixes the price, and if the price falls below that, the consumer benefits from it. If the price goes above, consumers pay, but it means the price is set by the CFD for 20 years. So it's an important sort of tool for doing that. But I think there's wider action we need to take. I mean, it's a point earlier about industry as well, around how we bring down the cost of that. The wider electrification point, I think, is really well made. Connections reform, how we build the grid to enable the electrification, is a really key part of this. We've reformed the connections queue. It's quite hard to explain how much of a mess that got into. 700 gigawatts waiting to connect to the national grid, an absurd amount. And it had just got out of control. And the process of reforming it has been painful. I mean, I acknowledge that, but it has been absolutely necessary. And it means we start from a place where if you get an offer to connect to the grid, it actually has some meaning. Whereas before, we just had this plethora of offers that we just couldn't ever build. So I think we want to make the fundamentals work towards electrification. And then it's the question of how we bring down the cost so that electrification is the route for you, but for everybody else as well.
When they are, could you just repeat to say the live?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Sorry,
So
yeah,
much.
Okay.
yeah. Gentleman at the front.
Spiresberg from Energy UK. Thanks
Hi.
for referencing our report. I mean, talk about later.
I don't know if I was supposed to say I got it last night, but anyway, I didn't tell anyone last night, so it's fine.
So I work on.
So, yeah.
Well, I was hoping I'd get to repeat the question.
Oh, yeah, please.
Go for it.
Yeah, so a question from Energy UK about how the UK is cooperating with European partners in a unstable world, unstable supply chains, hegemons, challenging security and so on.
I mean, it's really important. I mean, first of all, just to say on the EU more generally, and then I'll get to the supply chain point. I mean, resetting our relationship with the EU is absolutely critical. Whether or not you were in favour of Brexit, the nature of the way that we did Brexit disrupted a huge number of things that were important in the energy space in particular that played a hugely important role, and we have to get back to being part of that. Partly because I talked a bit about energy security before, but the only real route to our energy security is to work with our European neighbours and allies, the EU and Norway, where we've got huge opportunity. You referenced the Hamburg summit. I mean, the North Sea presents a great collective opportunity if we get that 300 gigawatts of offshore wind that we agreed in the Hamburg summit collectively built for all of us. That also presents an opportunity around the supply chain. And this is, again, I come back to this point around Britain is not an outlier in the clean power mission. You look around the world, everyone is moving towards this. Even the United States, despite some of the rhetoric, is building renewables extremely quickly at the moment and building grid as well. And so the supply chain is really important. There's an opportunity for us to work with Europe, for Britain to play a part in that supply chain to assist Europe, and for Europe to play a part in our supply chain as well. So things like the Made in Europe process that the EU is going through at the moment, we understand why, but we've also done everything we can to make sure the UK is part of that process because it's in both of our interests to make that happen. And I think the answer to this goes back to something I said before about industrial policy. I had a conversation when I was in Denmark, when Denmark was hosting the G7. Every single one of those other ministers from Europe was talking about how they pick up the phone to developers and say, why are you not building your project in Denmark or Germany or wherever? And they found it really unusual that Britain just doesn't have the culture of doing that. It does now, I have to tell you, because I have those conversations. Why are you not building this in Britain? We're an outlier in this. Supply chain has always been a sort of secondary consideration, partly because it's been there. But now there's a much more challenging supply chain demand where we are looking years in the future to get parts. If we don't work together and if we don't build industry here in Britain, there's a real risk we can't build the projects that we need. So we've got to invest in those projects now and work with our neighbours much more closely. And then things like rejoining the ETS, rejoining the internal electricity market, these things are important to create as frictionless a relationship as we can. Interconnectors are a vital part of our energy mix, but we'll also become a net exporter of energy, of electricity soon. Getting the interconnectors right and the market conditions right is absolutely critical.
Great, lady here on the second row.
Emma Martin from Bosch. Thank you very much. Really very interesting discussion. I really appreciate the government objectives on the net zero, and I think it's very important to also follow on the targets. But I don't agree with the pace at the moment we are facing as an industry. I think cheaper energy is very important to keep the industry going. And at the moment, the UK counts as actually one of the most expensive countries for energy. And I think if we look to the geopolitical situation at the moment with China and also street and foremost and the impact why it's already happening is actually the look of cheaper energy or actually preventing cheaper energy to go to some countries. When we then look into this case, what we are going into it, you said that you closed the coal mining in the UK, which is, I think, it's good. But on the other hand, we don't have a fair playing field because we accept importing products from other countries which actually is produced through coal. So if you look to the value chain from well-to-wheel in the automotive sector or others, you are allowing other countries actually to sell here, although actually their products are not for the value chain green, but you impose on the manufacturing who are actually in the UK and holding jobs or also creating jobs to then be definitely in line with the green and net zero methodology. And therefore, I think that something has to be done. Made in Europe, exactly, and it's an example why Europe is doing it, because they need to create a fair playing field, which we won't have at the moment currently in the UK. So I'm not opposing your policy, but I'm just asking, what can the government, in some sort of form do to protect industrializations in the UK? Another question is about the diversifications of the energy landscape in the UK. We see that Germany, for example, looking to hydrogen, but looking also to the UK to be a part of the solution of hydrogen, because you have the North Sea and what is happening with the hydrogen strategy? Is this anything going to come up properly soon on that side as well?
So thank you. A question from Bosch was about, is the UK going too fast? Is that hurting manufacturers facing competition from overseas that don't face the same stringent standards? And also, secondary to that, what's happening with hydrogen strategy from the government in the UK?
I think, firstly, the reason we're going as fast as we can on the clean power mission is exactly because we have one of the highest electricity prices in the world, and it's set by the price of gas. Far more than any other European country, gas sets the price. Now, it used to set at 80, 90%. It's now down to about 60%, but it's still higher than Norway or France or Spain or any of our comparable countries. Price of gas is much more equal, actually, but electricity is set by gas. And so the quicker we can break the link with that, the more we can bring down bills for industrial users. We can only do that by getting more renewables and nuclear onto the system. But we've also done things like recently we announced moving some legacy renewable obligations onto a wholesale CFD to try and bring down the cost of that. So we are taking action on it, but I accept we have to do much more. On the hydrogen point, we inherited an ambition from the previous government that we didn't think was deliverable, and actually I don't think industry did either. And so we've taken it back to the drawing board to keep an ambition there, But we've also got a much clearer view of the role that hydrogen will play in the energy mix than we did maybe 10 years ago, where I think if we're honest, people saw hydrogen as an answer to everything. I think we now know it's going to play a really critical role in some parts of the energy mix, but not every part. And so we will publish the strategy very soon, is my commitment. It's, if I'm honest, a frustration we haven't published it yet. We're working across government to get it published as soon as possible.
I'll add that to the lexicon of timelines for government publication.
Soon is, you sort of learn coming into this job, summer doesn't mean summer in the same way as it means for everyone else, but soon does mean soon, I promise you.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I think we're going to have to leave it there. And so, yeah, thanks for the conversation. It's been fascinating. And I think we're now going to move on to the panel discussion.
Thanks very much.